Ava Coleman was no stranger to adversity, but nothing could have prepared her for the lengths her enemies would go to stop her. As the city's first black female mayor, Ava's victory was a historic milestone, but it came at a price. Beneath the polished walls of City Hall, resentment simmered among those who saw her as a threat to the old ways. It wasn't long before the tension erupted into open hostility. Late one night, that hostility turned into a brutal attack that left Ava humiliated but not defeated. Her response would shock the city, unravel years of corruption, and spark a revolution for justice. But at what cost? Could one woman stand against a deeply entrenched system determined to break her? Before we dive into this gripping story of courage, betrayal, and redemption, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you're ready to be inspired by Ava's fight for justice, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss stories like this. Ava Coleman stepped into the grand halls of City Hall, her head held high, a storm of emotions swirling beneath her composed exterior. She had just made history as the first black woman to hold the position of mayor in her city, a monumental achievement that had sparked both celebration and controversy. For Ava, this role was more than just a milestone. It was a chance to lead, transform, and challenge the entrenched injustices that had plagued the city for decades. Bookmark. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the polished floors as Ava made her way to her new office. Her tailored navy suit hugged her form perfectly, exuding authority and professionalism. But beyond her impeccable appearance was a fierce determination. She had fought tirelessly to get here, navigating a campaign marred by skepticism and outright hostility from some quarters. Her first day as mayor began with a whirlwind of introductions and meetings, but Ava's mind was already racing with ideas. As she walked past staff members, some paused to greet her with smiles, while others eyed her with thinly veiled suspicion. She noticed it but didn't let it faze her. Change, she reminded herself, often made people uncomfortable. By mid-morning, Ava was seated at her desk, flipping through a thick stack of reports. They painted a grim picture. Deteriorating infrastructure, underfunded schools, skyrocketing homelessness, and, most pressing of all, a police department notorious for its corruption and abuses. Ava's campaign had centered on promises of reform, particularly within law enforcement, where complaints of racial profiling and excessive force had been swept under the rug for years. This wasn't just a political promise for her. It was personal. She knew the stakes were high, but she had no intention of backing down. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant, Layla Torres, peeked her head inside, her expression cautious. "Mayor Coleman, Chief Davis, and his team are waiting for you in the conference room," Layla said. Ava nodded, setting the reports aside. "Thank you, Layla. I'll be there shortly." The short walk to the conference room felt heavier than she anticipated. She knew this meeting with the police leadership would be a pivotal moment. Chief Davis had been with the force for nearly 30 years, a man known for his old-school methods and an unwavering belief in the status quo. During Ava's campaign, he had made it abundantly clear that he didn't think much of her, often dismissing her proposals as idealistic nonsense. As she entered the room, the atmosphere was tense. Chief Davis sat at the head of the long table, flanked by several senior officers. Their expressions were stoic, their postures rigid. The air practically crackled with silent hostility. "Good morning, everyone," Ava greeted, her voice calm and steady as she took her seat at the opposite end of the table. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." "Mayor Coleman," Davis replied curtly, his tone formal but devoid of warmth. Ignoring the undercurrent of disdain, Ava began. "I've spent the past few weeks reviewing community feedback and reports regarding our city's law enforcement. It's clear there are significant issues that need to be addressed, starting with accountability and transparency." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. The officers exchanged glances, some looking skeptical, others visibly annoyed. Davis leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he spoke. "With all due respect, Madam Mayor," he said, his voice measured but tinged with condescension. "Policing is a complex job. It's easy to criticize from the outside, but you have to understand the challenges we face in the field." "I do understand," Ava replied, her gaze unwavering. And I also understand the challenges our residents face when they don't feel safe in their own neighborhoods, or worse, when they fear the very people meant to protect them. The room grew colder. One officer, a younger man with a smirk, leaned back in his chair, clearly unimpressed. Davis's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ava continued, outlining her proposals: an independent oversight committee to investigate complaints against officers, mandatory bias training, and community engagement initiatives designed to rebuild trust. She spoke with clarity and conviction, but the resistance in the room was palpable. When she finished, Davis leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "These changes could have serious consequences for officer morale," he said, his tone heavy with disdain. "Policing requires decisiveness and authority. Adding oversight and bureaucracy might hinder our ability to do our jobs." "Chief Davis," Ava responded, her voice firm but composed, "morale cannot come at the expense of accountability. We need to rebuild trust with the community, and that starts with acknowledging that there is a problem." Silence followed her statement, the tension in the room almost suffocating. Ava could feel the disapproval radiating from the officers, but she stood her ground. Change was never easy, but she hadn't come this far to back down. As the meeting adjourned, Ava lingered for a moment, watching the officers file out. Layla appeared at the door, her face reflecting a mix of sympathy and admiration. "That was intense," Layla said quietly. "It's just the beginning," Ava replied, her voice resolute. "If they think they can intimidate me, they don't know who they're dealing with." That evening, as Ava sat in her office, reviewing the events of the day, she felt a flicker of doubt creep in. The resistance she faced was greater than she had anticipated, but she quickly extinguished it. This wasn't just about her. It was about the people who had placed their trust in her to bring change. With renewed determination, she prepared herself for the battles ahead. The days following Ava Coleman's first meeting with Chief Davis were nothing short of a whirlwind. Resistance, both overt and covert, seemed to greet her at every turn. Though she had expected pushback, the sheer scale of hostility from within City Hall and the police department took even her by surprise. It started subtly. Staff, who once greeted her with polite smiles, now avoided her gaze. Emails were left unanswered, files were mysteriously delayed or misplaced, and scheduling conflicts conveniently disrupted key meetings. Ava recognized the tactics for what they were, which were deliberate acts of passive resistance. Her assistant, Layla, remained a steadfast ally during these tense days. One morning, she arrived at Ava's office carrying a stack of reports, her expression troubled. "Mayor Coleman, there's something you need to see," Layla began, setting the reports on Ava's desk. "What is it?" Ava asked, flipping through the pages. "Rumors," Layla said carefully. "There's talk that some officers are quietly organizing resistance to your reforms. Nothing overt, but it's enough to cause delays and disruptions." Ava leaned back in her chair, her jaw tightening. "Let them whisper," she said, her voice steady. "They won't scare me into inaction. I have a job to do." Layla nodded, though the concern in her eyes lingered. "Just be careful, Ava. Some of these people, they don't play fair." The tension wasn't confined to City Hall. On her morning drives to work, Ava began to notice an unusual number of police cruisers parked along her route. Officers stood idly at intersections, their stares cold and deliberate as she passed. At first, Ava brushed it off as a coincidence, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. Even during her evening jogs in the park near her apartment routine, she had always felt the unsettling weight of their presence. Some mornings, she would spot patrol cars stationed at the park entrance, the officers leaning casually against their vehicles as if waiting for her. They never spoke, but their silent stares carried an unspoken message: "We're watching." One evening, Ava returned home after a grueling day at City Hall to find a folded piece of paper wedged under her apartment door. Her pulse quickened as she picked it up and unfolded it. The message was short, but chilling. "We know where you live. Watch your back." She stood frozen in the dim hallway, the words burning into her mind. Her first instinct was to call the police, but the irony of that thought made her laugh bitterly. The very department she was trying to reform could hardly be trusted to investigate such a threat. Instead, Ava clenched the note in her hand, her resolve hardening. She had faced worse in her life and refused to let intimidation deter her now. Still, She double-locked her door that night, something she had never felt the need to do before. The next day, Ava tucked the note into a drawer and carried on as if nothing had happened. Discussing it with anyone, even Layla, felt like giving the threat power. Instead, she threw herself deeper into her work, poring over reports and crafting new proposals. But the unease lingered, a constant undercurrent to her daily life. Her meetings with city officials grew increasingly strained. Department heads would question her decisions under the guise of concern for the city, their comments dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "You need to understand, Mayor Coleman," one department head told her during a particularly tense meeting, "these reforms could have unintended consequences. You might end up doing more harm than good." Ava fixed him with a steady gaze. "The harm has already been done," she replied. "Ignoring the problem won't make it go away." But it was her next meeting with Chief Davis and his team that pushed the tension to its breaking point. Davis, flanked by his most senior officers, listened with a stony expression as Ava presented her latest proposals. They included stricter accountability measures, expanded community engagement programs, and mandatory de-escalation training for all officers. "Madam Mayor," Davis began, his tone carefully measured, "I must express my concerns about these proposals. They could seriously impact officer morale and effectiveness." Ava met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "Chief Davis, the community's trust in law enforcement is at an all-time low. If we don't address these issues head-on, we risk further division. These reforms are not optional, they are necessary." The room fell silent, but the hostility was palpable. One officer, a wiry man with a perpetual smirk, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Careful, Madam Mayor," he said, his tone casual but loaded with menace. "Some people don't appreciate being put under a microscope." Ava's jaw tightened, but she refused to show fear. "Some people don't appreciate abuse of power," she replied, her voice carrying a steely edge. The officer's smirk faltered and he looked away. Davis remained stoic, but Ava could sense his anger simmering just beneath the surface. The meeting ended with no clear resolution. As the officers filed out, their barely concealed disdain hung heavy in the air. Layla entered the room moments later, her brow furrowed. "That didn't go well," she said quietly. "It went exactly as I expected," Ava replied, gathering her notes. "They think they can intimidate me. They're wrong." That night, Ava returned home exhausted but resolute. She knew the battles ahead would be long and grueling, but she reminded herself of why she had fought so hard to be in this position. This wasn't just about her. It was about the people who had placed their trust in her to bring change. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifted back to the note left at her door. The words echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the forces working against her. But Ava was no stranger to adversity. She had overcome too much to falter now. The next morning, she woke early, her resolve stronger than ever. If they thought they could scare her into submission, they didn't know Ava Coleman. Late nights had quickly become a routine for Ava Coleman. As the resistance to her reforms mounted, so did her workload. That evening, she was one of the last people left at City Hall. The once bustling halls were now silent, the distant hum of a cleaning crew the only sound accompanying the faint glow of her desk lamp. The reports in front of her blurred together as fatigue set in, but Ava pushed through. Every delay, every roadblock placed in her way, only fueled her determination. Tonight was no different, until she noticed the time. It was past 10 p.m., and the parking lot outside would be almost deserted. Wrapping her coat tightly around her, Ava left her office. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way to the building's exit. The night air was crisp and still, the shadows of the city stretching long under the dim glow of streetlights. Her car was parked at the far corner of the lot, a choice she now regretted. The sensation hit her before she even saw them, a prickling sound at the back of her neck, the unshakable feeling of being watched. Ava's eyes darted around the lot, scanning for movement. At first, everything seemed still. Then she heard it, the faint crunch of gravel. Her heart raced as two figures emerged from behind a parked van. They wore police uniforms, but their faces were partially obscured by the shadows. "Evening, Madam Mayor," one of them called out, his tone laced with mockery. Ava's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. "Officers," she replied, her voice steady. "Is there something I can help you with?" The men exchanged glances, smirking. One of them stepped closer, blocking her path to the car. His build was stocky, his stance threatening. "You've been working late," he said casually. "Stirring things up, changing all the rules." Ava squared her shoulders. "I have a job to do," she replied firmly. "If you'll excuse me, I'd like to get home." The second officer chuckled, shaking his head. "Home? You think you can just waltz in, disrupt everything we've built, and go home like nothing happened?" Her throat tightened, but she refused to show fear. "I'm here to serve this city," she said. "Now step aside." They didn't move. Instead, the first officer reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal canister. Before Ava could react, he sprayed a thick, viscous liquid onto her torso and arms. The acrid smell hit her nose, and she stumbled back in alarm. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising with both anger and fear. "Teaching you a lesson," the second officer sneered. He pulled out a roll of industrial adhesive tape. In seconds, they were pressing the sticky substance against her coat, forcing her back against the rough brick wall of the parking lot. Ava struggled, her body twisting against their grip, but their strength overpowered her. "Stop this. You'll regret it," she yelled, her voice echoing in the empty lot. "Oh, we'll regret it?" the first officer mocked, leaning in close. His breath reeked of tobacco, and his voice dripped with derision. "You think you're untouchable because you've got a title? You're nothing. Just another mouth trying to tell us how to do our jobs." The tape held her fast, pinning her arms against the wall. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out despite the humiliation and the sting of adhesive against her skin. "This city deserves better than your likes," Ava spat, her voice unwavering, "and I won't stop fighting for it." The second officer slapped her across the face, the sting bringing tears to her eyes. "Big words for someone who can't move," he sneered. They stepped back, laughing at her helplessness. "Look at her," one of them said. The mighty mayor stuck to a wall like a fly in a trap. Ava's breath came in ragged gasps, her body aching from their assault. Yet, even in this moment of vulnerability, she refused to let them break her spirit. She glared at them, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You think this will stop me?" she said through gritted teeth. "You're wrong." The first officer smirked, his face inches from hers. "This is just the beginning, Madam Mayor. Consider it a warning. Back off, or next time, it won't be glue." They left her there, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the night. Ava stood motionless, her body trembling from the cold and adrenaline coursing through her veins. She struggled against the adhesive, but it was no use. The tape held fast, unyielding. The once busy streets were now deserted, the faint hum of distant traffic her only company. Her mind raced, replaying the attack, their words, and the fury that boiled beneath her humiliation. They thought they could silence her. They thought they could scare her into submission. They were wrong. Eventually, the sound of footsteps approached. Ava's heart leaped as a young man, perhaps in his 20s, rounded the corner. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight before him. "Miss, are you okay?" he called, rushing toward her. "Get me down," Ava managed to say, her voice hoarse. The man worked quickly, using his phone's flashlight to examine the adhesive. He pulled out a pocket knife and carefully cut away the tape, his hands trembling as he freed her. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice shaking. Ava shook her head, unwilling to explain just yet. "Call an ambulance," she instructed. He nodded, fumbling with his phone. "Help is on the way," he assured her. As she sank to the ground, the weight of the night finally caught up to her. She was hurt, humiliated, and furious, but she was alive, and she would make sure those responsible paid for what they had done. The fluorescent lights in the hospital room buzzed softly, their harsh glare reflecting off sterile white walls. Ava Coleman lay still on the narrow bed, her body wrapped in bandages, her mind caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Pain radiated from every part of her body. The sting of her ribs, the raw skin on her arms where the adhesive had clung to her coat, and the throbbing ache in her cheek from the slap she had endured. But Ava wasn't the type to wallow in self-pity. She didn't have the luxury. Her thoughts churned as she stared at the ceiling. Every breath she took reminded her of the attack, but it also reminded her why she had taken on this fight. The officers who had assaulted her wanted to break her resolve, but instead they had ignited a fire. The door creaked open, breaking the heavy silence. Layla Torres walked in, clutching a bouquet of flowers and a tote bag filled with documents. Usually composed and confident, Layla's face now showed worry and fatigue. She placed the flowers on the bedside table and pulled a chair close to Ava's bed. "You look terrible," Layla said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "How are you feeling?" Ava let out a dry laugh, though the effort sent a sharp pain through her chest. "I've been better." "What's the situation?" Layla hesitated, clearly reluctant to burden Ava further. "You shouldn't worry about that right now. Focus on recovering." Ava's expression hardened, her determination cutting through the haze of pain. "I don't have the luxury of rest, Layla. They're already ahead of us. I need to know what we're dealing with." Sighing, Layla reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "The city is in an uproar," she began. "Rumors about your attack are spreading, but without official details, people are filling in the blanks. The police department has issued no statement. Chief Davis is playing it off like business as usual." Ava clenched her fist, the motion sending a wave of pain through her arm. "They think they can brush this under the rug," she said, her voice steady despite her anger. "Not if we don't let them," Layla said, leaning forward. "We have allies. Mark Ellis is already mobilizing community leaders. Rachel Wong wants to run an exposé on the corruption in the department. And there's something else." Ava's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Layla hesitated, lowering her voice. "Malcolm Green, one of the younger officers, reached out. He says he's seen enough and wants to talk. He's willing to share information about what's happening inside the department." Ava's gaze sharpened. "Do you trust him?" "I don't know," Layla admitted. "But if he's genuine, he could be the key to blowing this wide open." "Set up a meeting," Ava said without hesitation. "Discreetly? We can't let this get back to Davis or his people." Layla nodded, though the worry in her eyes lingered. For the next hour, she updated Ava on the growing unrest in the city. Protests were beginning to take shape, though they lacked focus and leadership. People were angry, but anger alone wouldn't bring change. Ava knew it would be up to her to channel that energy into something meaningful. After Layla left, Ava stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. The attack replayed in her head, the officers' sneers, the pain, the humiliation. They had wanted to silence her, to make her afraid, but they had underestimated her. Instead of fear, they had fueled her determination. The next morning, journalist Rachel Wong arrived at the hospital, her notebook and recorder in hand. Rachel had followed Ava's career since her election and had become one of her most vocal supporters. She sat at the edge of Ava's bed, her expression a mix of empathy and determination. "I need to know everything," Rachel said. "Every detail of what happened that night." Ava recounted the attack, her voice steady despite the pain it brought to relieve it. She described the officers' words, their threats, and their cruelty. Rachel listened intently, her pen moving swiftly across the page. "This is bigger than just your attack," Rachel said when Ava finished. "This is about the culture within the department. We need to expose it. Then do it," Ava replied firmly. "But be careful. They'll come after you if they think you're getting too close." "I'm ready for that," Rachel said, her voice resolute. That evening, Layla returned with news about Malcolm Green. "He's willing to meet tonight," she said. "But he's scared. He says if anyone finds out, he's finished." "Tell him he's doing the right thing," Ava said, "and make sure the meeting place is secure." Later that night, in a dimly lit room at a local community center, Malcolm arrived. He was young, with a neat uniform and a tense posture that betrayed his fear. Ava, her bandaged hands resting on the table, met his gaze as he sat down. "You've taken a big risk coming here," Ava said. "Why now?" Malcolm hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "I can't keep watching this happen. The cover-ups, the intimidation, the abuse is wrong. What they did to you, Madam Mayor, was the last straw." "Why didn't you speak up before?" Layla asked, her tone sharp. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Because I didn't think anyone would listen. You don't understand what it's like on the inside. If you step out of line, they make your life hell." "We're listening now," Ava said, her voice firm. "But we need more than words, Malcolm. We need evidence." He nodded, his hands trembling as he pulled a USB drive from his pocket. "This has copies of internal emails, incident reports, and disciplinary records. It's not everything, but it's a start." Ava took the drive, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Malcolm. This could change everything." As Malcolm left, Layla turned to Ava. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" "We'll find out," Ava replied, holding up the USB drive. The next morning, Rachel and her team began analyzing the contents of the drive. The documents painted a damning picture: buried complaints, falsified records, and officers protected by a system designed to shield them from accountability. From her hospital bed, Ava read through the files, her anger simmering with each revelation. This was the proof they needed to expose the corruption that had festered for so long. As the city lights flickered outside her window that evening, Ava felt a surge of determination. The battle ahead would be fierce, but she was ready. They had tried to silence her. Now, she had the evidence to fight back. The city woke to a firestorm. Headlines splashed across every major news outlet. Police corruption exposed, a system built on fear and silence. Rachel Wong's investigative article struck a nerve, painting a harrowing picture of the systemic abuse that had plagued the city for years. The leaked documents provided by Malcolm Green were damning proof of a department not only failing its citizens, but actively shielding those who abused their power. Bookmark, go back. Social media was ablaze with outrage. Residents shared stories of their own harrowing encounters with law enforcement, their voices rising like a tidal wave of pain and anger. By mid-morning, the steps of City Hall were flooded with protesters, their chants echoing across the city. "Justice now. Accountability. Resign Davis." From her hospital bed, Ava Coleman scrolled through her tablet, reading the article and the flood of online reactions. Layla arrived shortly after, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she carried a stack of papers. "It's working," Layla said, dropping the papers onto Ava's bedside table. "Rachel's article is everywhere. People are furious, and Davis is scrambling." "What's his response?" Ava asked, her tone calm but sharp. "He held a press conference an hour ago," Layla replied, pulling up a video on her phone. "He called the allegations baseless and accused the media of twisting facts for sensationalism." Ava watched the clip, her lips pressing into a thin line as Davis stood at the podium. His usual stoic demeanor was cracked, his voice strained as he attempted to dismiss the revelations. "He's trying to buy time," Ava said, handing the phone back to Layla. "We can't let him." Rachel arrived shortly after, her notebook in hand. "The feedback has been overwhelming," she said, settling into a chair. "People are coming forward with more stories of residents who've been mistreated, officers who've been silenced." "This is bigger than just your attack, Ava." "It always was," Ava replied, her voice resolute. "This is about a system that's been rotting from the inside. We need to make sure the rot is exposed." Rachel nodded. "The next step is crucial. We can't just ride this wave. We need to keep the pressure on." "Do you have enough for a follow-up?" Ava asked. "More than enough," Rachel replied, flipping through her notes. "We've got accounts of racial profiling, excessive force, and even instances where evidence was tampered with. And there's Malcolm's testimony." "Release it piece by piece," Ava instructed. "Each new detail will keep the public's attention and make it impossible for them to ignore." By that afternoon, the protests outside City Hall had swelled to thousands. Community leaders like Mark Ellis stood on makeshift platforms addressing the crowd with fiery speeches. "We've lived in fear for too long." Mark shouted through a megaphone, his voice echoing above the chants. "This is our city, and we deserve better. We deserve a police force that protects us, not one that preys on us." The crowd roared in agreement, their energy electric. Inside the hospital, Layla watched the scene unfold on the news, turning to Ava with a smile. "This is the beginning of something big," she said. "It's about time," Ava replied quietly. But not everyone welcomed the rising tide of accountability. Inside the police department, the atmosphere was tense and volatile. Officers loyal to Chief Davis doubled down, dismissing the allegations as exaggerations or outright lies. Others, sensing the shift in public sentiment, began quietly distancing themselves from Davis and his inner circle. Malcolm, who had remained largely in the background since the leaks, sent Layla a frantic message late that night. "They know something. I think Davis suspects I'm the leak." Ava read the message with a sinking feeling. "We need to protect him," she said firmly. "If they retaliate, we lose one of our strongest allies." "I'll make sure he stays out of the spotlight," Layla promised. The next morning, Rachel published her follow-up article, this time delving into specific cases of police misconduct. The stories were chilling: families torn apart by wrongful arrests, victims of excessive force left with lifelong scars, and officers silenced when they tried to speak out. The backlash was immediate. Within hours, protests intensified, spreading from City Hall to neighborhoods long neglected by city leadership. Residents marched with signs that read, "We deserve justice, no more silence." Inside City Hall, the pressure mounted. Council members, previously hesitant to take a firm stance, began voicing support for an investigation into the police department. The mayor's office was inundated with calls and emails, the majority demanding swift action. Chief Davis, once seen as untouchable, found himself cornered. Whispers of an internal investigation spread like wildfire, leaving his allies scrambling to cover their tracks. Even officers once fiercely loyal to him began to waver, fearing for their own careers. Malcolm continued feeding Layla updates from inside the department. "They're turning on each other," he wrote in one message. "Davis's inner circle is panicking. Some of them are starting to talk." As Rachel's second article gained traction, Ava and her team worked tirelessly to keep the momentum alive. They coordinated with community leaders to hold town hall meetings, giving residents a platform to share their stories and demand change. Each testimony added fuel to the movement, creating an unstoppable force that no one could ignore. Meanwhile, Ava's hospital room became an impromptu war room. Layla, Rachel, and Mark gathered there daily, strategizing their next moves. "Howard's grip is slipping," Rachel said during one late-night meeting. "The cracks are showing. We just need to keep pushing." "And we will," Ava replied, her voice steady. "This isn't just about him. It's about dismantling the entire system that allowed this to happen." By the end of the week, the city reached a breaking point. Under pressure from the community and an escalating investigation, Chief Davis was placed on administrative leave. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city, sparking celebrations among protesters and renewed hope among residents. Layla burst into Ava's hospital room with the news, her face alight with triumph. "He's out," she said. "Davis is done." Ava allowed herself a small smile, the first glimmer of relief she had felt in days. But as much as this was a victory, she knew it was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. As the sun set over the city that evening, Ava gazed out of her hospital window. The streets below were alive with energy, a testament to the power of collective action. She took a deep breath, her resolve stronger than ever. The people were with her, and together, they would continue to fight for the justice the city so desperately needed. The pressure on the police department had become unbearable. Every headline, every protest chant outside City Hall, and every social media post demanding justice carved deeper cracks into the institution's foundation. Chief Davis's suspension sent shockwaves through the department, leaving officers scrambling to shield themselves from the fallout. Inside her hospital room, Ava Coleman watched the chaos unfold. The bruises on her body were healing, but her resolve was only growing stronger. Layla and Rachel arrived each day with updates, their reports fueling Ava's determination to see this fight through. Rachel arrived one morning, her expression grim, as she placed a folder on Ava's bedside table. "We've uncovered more," she said, her voice low. "It's worse than we thought." Ava opened the folder, her fingers brushing over the printed emails and incident reports. Rachel leaned forward, her tone urgent. "These are internal communications between Davis and several senior officers," Rachel explained. "They've been systematically burying complaints, falsifying reports, and protecting abusive cops for years. This wasn't negligence, was deliberate." Each page Ava turned revealed another layer of corruption. Manipulated evidence, threats against whistleblowers, and a system designed to shield itself from accountability. "They built an entire fortress to protect themselves," Ava murmured, her eyes narrowing. "This is criminal," Rachel nodded, "and it all ties back to Davis. He wasn't just complicit, he orchestrated it." Moments later, Layla entered the room, her phone in hand. "The protests are escalating," she reported. "Mark's organizing another march tonight, this time straight to City Hall. They're calling for a full investigation and more resignations." "Good," Ava said firmly, "but we need to do more than march. Keep releasing information. If we stay ahead of them, they won't be able to spin their narrative." Rachel hesitated. "There's something else," she said cautiously. "One of the officers involved in your attack has been spotted meeting with a lawyer. Looks like he's trying to cut a deal. Ava's jaw tightened. Let him try, she said, her voice cold. We have enough evidence to implicate all of them. Inside the department, tensions reached a boiling point. Officers loyal to Davis clung to their defiance, insisting that the allegations were exaggerated. Others, fearing the collapse of their careers, began cooperating with investigators. Malcolm, who was still working covertly, sent Layla regular updates. They're turning on each other, he wrote in one message. Davis's inner circle is falling apart. Some of them are starting to talk. Rachel's second article continued to gain traction, exposing a series of specific cases where officers falsified records to protect their colleagues. The stories were backed by testimony and evidence, painting a damning picture of a department more concerned with its image than the safety of the community. As public anger swelled, so did the protests. Thousands marched through neighborhoods, their signs demanding accountability and justice. Mark Ellis stood at the front, his voice booming through a megaphone. This isn't just about Davis, he declared. This is about a system that has failed us for years. We won't stop until every corrupt officer is held accountable. The crowd's chants echoed through the streets, their energy palpable. Inside her hospital room, Ava watched the footage with a mixture of pride and urgency. Howard's allies are starting to crumble, Rachel said during one meeting with Ava and Layla. We just need to keep pushing. And we will, Ava replied, her voice unwavering. This fight isn't just about him. It's about dismantling the entire system that allowed this to happen. The following week, a third article hit the press. This one delved into the department's culture, revealing how officers were trained to prioritize loyalty to the badge over accountability. Rachel included an anonymous interview with Malcolm, who described the pressure to stay silent and the consequences of speaking out. They make you feel like speaking up is a betrayal, Malcolm said in the article. But what's worse, betraying the department or betraying the people we're supposed to protect? The article struck a chord, spreading quickly and sparking conversations across the city and beyond. Residents demanded a formal investigation, and City Hall announced that an independent firm would oversee the probe. Chief Davis, silent since his suspension, was finally cornered. Facing mounting evidence and a growing number of officers turning against him, he agreed to an interview with a local news station. It was a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, but it backfired spectacularly. Davis claimed ignorance of the corruption within his department, blaming a few bad apples and accusing the media of sensationalizing the issue. His dismissive tone and refusal to accept responsibility only fueled public anger. Ava watched the interview from her hospital bed, her lips curling into a thin smile. He's finished, she said simply. The final blow came the next day. Officer Daniel Torres, a younger member of the department, contacted Rachel directly. He admitted to witnessing Ava's attack and provided details about how it had been planned. They bragged about teaching her a lesson, Torres said in a recorded statement. They knew what they were doing and thought they could get away with it. Rachel wasted no time publishing the story. Torres's testimony, combined with the mountain of evidence, left no room for doubt. The protesters outside City Hall erupted into cheers as word spread that Davis had submitted his resignation. That evening, Layla rushed into Ava's hospital room, her face alight with triumph. He's out, she said. Davis is done. Ava closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the victory sink in. When she opened them, her gaze was sharp. This isn't over, she said. Davis was just one piece of the puzzle. We need to keep going. The department was beginning to collapse, but Ava knew that dismantling a corrupt system would take time, effort, and unwavering resolve. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment of hope. Together, they were reshaping the city, one step at a time. The resignation of Chief Davis was a seismic shift, but it was far from the end. While the public celebrated the symbolic victory, Ava Coleman knew better. The head of the operation may have been removed, but the system that had enabled corruption remained intact. From her hospital bed, Ava and her team worked tirelessly to keep the pressure on, aware that complacency would only allow the system to rebuild itself in secrecy. Rachel Wong's next exposé was set to strike the heart of the department's corruption. This time, The article went beyond Davis's actions, revealing how a culture of silence and complicity had flourished for decades. She laid out how officers were not only trained to ignore misconduct, but also encouraged to protect one another at all costs. "It's not just a few bad apples," Rachel said during a meeting with Ava and Layla. "This is a whole orchard, carefully cultivated to shield its own." One chilling testimony came from Malcolm Green, whose anonymous interview revealed the psychological tactics used to ensure officers' loyalty. "They make you believe that loyalty to the department is loyalty to your fellow officers," Malcolm explained. "But in reality, it's about loyalty to the people in power, the ones who make sure your career rises or falls based on how well you toe the line." Rachel included hard evidence to support these claims: emails instructing officers to bury complaints, records of tampered investigations, and even memos warning against cooperation with oversight bodies. "This isn't negligence," Ava said after reviewing the draft. "It's deliberate. And the city needs to know." The article was published the following morning. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted with calls for a complete overhaul of the police department, while protesters filled the streets in numbers that dwarfed previous demonstrations. The chants of "no more silence" and "dismantle the system" could be heard for blocks. Inside City Hall, council members were inundated with calls and emails demanding action. Even those who had been hesitant to support Ava's reforms found themselves with little choice but to align with the growing movement. "They're finally starting to listen," Layla said as she placed her phone on Ava's bedside table. "Not because they want to," Ava replied, "but because they have to. We need to keep pushing." Rachel's exposé also sent shockwaves through the department itself. Officers who had remained silent out of fear or complicity began to feel the walls closing in. Some resigned quietly, hoping to distance themselves from the growing scandal. Others turned to lawyers, desperate to cut deals before the investigation exposed them further. Malcolm Green continued to provide critical updates from within the department. "Davis's closest allies are panicking," he wrote in a text to Layla. "They know the investigation is closing in, and they're starting to turn on each other." One such officer was Deputy Chief Victor Stein, who had been a key enforcer of Davis's corrupt policies. Emails leaked by Malcolm revealed Stein's role in orchestrating cover-ups, intimidating whistleblowers, and silencing victims. "Stein is next," Rachel said during a late-night meeting with Ava and Layla. "We've got enough to name him in the next article." "Do it," Ava replied without hesitation. "The public needs to see that this isn't just about one man. This is a system designed to protect itself at every level." The article was a bombshell. Within hours of its publication, Stein announced his resignation, citing personal reasons. But the public wasn't fooled. The protests outside City Hall swelled once again, with residents demanding criminal charges against Stein and other high-ranking officers implicated in the scandal. Meanwhile, Ava's hospital room remained a hub of strategy and determination. Rachel, Layla, and Mark Ellis gathered daily, mapping out their next moves. "We need to keep the momentum going," Mark said one evening. "The community is energized, but we can't let this moment slip away." "I agree," Ava said. "We need to channel their energy into action policy changes, accountability measures, and rebuilding trust from the ground up." One of the key steps in Ava's plan was the formation of an independent oversight committee. The committee would include community leaders, activists, and legal experts tasked with investigating police misconduct and ensuring transparency. "Accountability starts with oversight," Ava explained during a meeting with city officials. "And this committee will be a model for how to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve." Despite resistance from the police union and a handful of city council members, the Oversight Committee was officially established within weeks. Mark, Rachel, and Malcolm were among its most active participants, working tirelessly to uncover cases of misconduct that had been buried for years. One of the committee's first actions was to reopen the investigation into Ava's attack. Malcolm provided crucial testimony, linking the officers responsible to a pattern of abusive behavior. Within days, those officers were arrested and charged. Their mugshots splashed across the evening news, a powerful symbol of accountability finally being enforced. "It's a start," Ava said to Layla as they watched the broadcast from her hospital room. But we have a long way to go. The committee's work extended beyond Ava's case. Dozens of complaints were reviewed, with many resulting in disciplinary action or criminal referrals. The department, once seen as untouchable, was finally being held to account. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Some officers, resistant to the new era of accountability, resigned in protest. Others resorted to subtle acts of sabotage, hoping to undermine the committee's work. They're clinging to the old ways, Layla said. But it won't stop us. Ava agreed. If they're upset, it means we're doing something right. In addition to addressing the department's misconduct, Ava pushed for broader reforms across the city. Under her leadership, funds were redirected to neglected neighborhoods, with investments in public resources, after-school programs, and mental health services. Parks were renovated, and community centers reopened, giving residents spaces to rebuild their lives. The city was changing slowly but surely. One evening, Ava took her first walk outside since leaving the hospital. She found herself back in the parking lot where the attack had occurred. The wall, once stained with adhesive, had been scrubbed clean. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough surface. The memories flooded back, the pain, the fear, the humiliation. But instead of anger, Ava felt pride. She had survived, and she had fought back. This city was hers, and she was determined to rebuild it, piece by piece. The city was at a crossroads. With Chief Davis and Deputy Chief Stein removed from power, the tide of public sentiment was shifting. People who had once felt silenced were speaking out, their collective voices amplifying a movement for justice and accountability. The Oversight Committee, now fully operational, had become a symbol of the city's determination to uproot corruption and rebuild trust. From her office, Coleman was no longer confined to the hospital and monitored the progress closely. The scars of her attack still ached, but she wore them as a badge of honor, a reminder of the stakes of this fight. Her days were consumed by meetings with committee members, strategy sessions with her team, and late-night reviews of newly uncovered evidence. Rachel Wong's third exposé landed like a thunderclap. The article painted an even darker picture of the department's operations under Davis and Stein's leadership. It detailed years of racial profiling, tampered evidence, and cases of excessive force, all protected by a web of falsified records and bureaucratic red tape. But it was the testimony of Officer Daniel Torres that hit hardest. Breaking ranks with his former colleagues, Torres provided a chilling account of the culture inside the department. They called it the Brotherhood, Torres told Rachel. You didn't cross it, or you'd pay the price. They taught us that protecting the badge was more important than protecting the people. Torres also revealed the planning that went into Ava's attack, admitting he had overheard the officers bragging about teaching her a lesson. His testimony, combined with Malcolm Green's earlier leaks, painted a damning portrait of an institution steeped in corruption. It was never just a few bad actors, Ava said during a meeting with the Oversight Committee. It was a system designed to shield itself from accountability. And now we have the proof to dismantle it. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters filled the streets once more, their chants echoing through neighborhoods that had long been ignored by the city's leadership. Signs demanding justice for Ava and accountability for years of systemic abuse became a fixture outside City Hall. Mark Ellis, a tireless community organizer, used the momentum to rally the people. At a town hall meeting packed with residents, he addressed the crowd with his usual passion. This isn't just about Ava's attack, Mark declared. This is about all of us, about every family that's been torn apart, every child who's grown up fearing the people meant to protect them, and we won't stop until the entire system is held accountable. The crowd erupted into applause, their energy fueling the movement's next steps. Inside the police department, the atmosphere was one of paranoia and division. Officers who had once stood united behind Davis were now turning on each other. Investigators, armed with new evidence and testimony, zeroed in on high-ranking officials who had overseen years of misconduct. Malcolm Green, still playing a critical role from within, sent Layla a series of updates. They're terrified, one message read. Emails are being deleted, records shredded. They're trying to cover their tracks. But it's too late. Despite the progress, Ava knew the fight was far from over. The Oversight Committee had begun reviewing dozens of cases, many involving officers still on active duty. The resistance from within the department was fierce, with some officers outright refusing to cooperate. "They think they can outlast us," Ava said during a late-night strategy session with Rachel and Mark. "But they're wrong. We have the public on our side, and we're not backing down." The city's resolve was tested once more when news broke of another whistleblower. A senior officer previously loyal to Davis came forward with documents proving that the department had intentionally suppressed evidence in multiple high-profile cases. The revelations added fuel to an already roaring fire, and public outcry reached a fever pitch. The next protest was the largest the city had ever seen. Tens of thousands of residents marched through the streets, their voices united in a call for justice. Families carried photographs of loved ones harmed by police misconduct, their stories adding a deeply personal layer to the movement. Ava stood on the steps of City Hall that day, addressing the crowd with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "This city has spoken," she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "We demand accountability, we demand transparency, and we demand justice. Not just for me, but for every person who has been silenced, ignored, or harmed by this system." The cheers that followed were deafening. Ava felt a swell of pride and responsibility as she looked out at the sea of faces. They weren't just fighting for her, they were fighting for themselves, their children, and the future of their city. The following week, the Oversight Committee announced its most significant findings yet. Dozens of officers were implicated in a wide range of misconduct, from falsifying reports to engaging in outright criminal behavior. Arrests followed swiftly, sending a clear message that no one was above the law. The news was met with a mix of relief and anger. For some, it was a long overdue reckoning. For others, it was a reminder of just how deep the corruption had run. Ava knew the city had taken a critical step forward, but she also understood that healing would take time. Rachel continued her investigative work, shining a light on the systemic failures that had allowed the department's misconduct to persist for so long. Her articles inspired similar movements in neighboring cities, sparking a regional push for police reform. Meanwhile, Mark focused on community engagement, organizing workshops and forums to educate residents on their rights and how to hold their leaders accountable. "We can't just dismantle the old system," Mark told Ava during a meeting. "We have to build something better in its place." Ava agreed wholeheartedly. Under her leadership, the city began implementing reforms that went beyond policing. Funds were redirected to education, mental health services, and job training programs in underserved neighborhoods. The aim was not just to address past wrongs, but to create opportunities for a brighter future. One evening, Ava returned to the parking lot where her attack had taken place. The scars on the wall where she had been pinned were barely visible now, but she still felt their weight. She stood there for a long moment, reflecting on how far she and the city had come. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Layla. The council just approved the new de-escalation training program. Another win. Ava smiled. The fight wasn't over, but victories like this reminded her why she had taken on this battle in the first place. The city was beginning to heal. The corrupt stronghold that had once dominated the police department was unraveling, replaced by a system striving for transparency and accountability. Ava Coleman's vision for reform was no longer just a campaign promise. It was becoming a reality. The Oversight Committee, now a permanent fixture in city governance, had proven its worth by holding officers accountable for their actions. Each week, committee members met to review cases, making decisions that were as fair as they were firm. Dozens of complaints that had once been buried were now seeing the light of day. And for the first time in years, residents felt their voices were being heard. One such resident was Mrs. Elena Martinez, a grandmother who had fought for justice after her grandson was wrongfully arrested years earlier. At a community town hall organized by Mark Ellis, she took the microphone, her voice steady but emotional. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "For so long, we were ignored. My grandson's story wasn't unique, but no one cared. Now, finally, we have hope. Thank you, Mayor Coleman. Thank you to everyone who fought for this. The room erupted into applause, the sentiment shared by many in attendance. Mark turned to Ava, who sat in the front row, her expression one of quiet pride. "This is why we fight," he said softly. Ava nodded. "And why we'll keep fighting." Beyond the committee's work, Ava was focused on institutionalizing the changes to ensure they lasted long after her tenure. She collaborated with city council members to pass a sweeping reform bill that overhauled police hiring practices, implemented mandatory de-escalation training, and prioritized community engagement initiatives. The reforms also included a robust system for residents to report misconduct, ensuring that no future complaints would be swept under the rug. The key to lasting change, Ava said during a press conference announcing the reforms, is to rebuild trust. And trust is earned through action, not words. The announcement was met with widespread support, though it also drew criticism from some quarters. The police union, still grappling with the fallout from the Oversight Committee's investigations, accused Ava of undermining law enforcement. "They're resistant because they're scared," Layla told Ava during a late-night meeting. "This isn't just about policies. It's about shifting the culture, and that takes time. And persistence," Ava added. "They can complain all they want. We're not stopping." As the reforms began to take root, the community played a vital role in ensuring their success. Mark organized youth mentorship programs, bringing together police officers and local teens to foster understanding and collaboration. Rachel continued to write her articles, celebrating progress while holding the city accountable for its promises. The streets, once filled with protesters demanding justice, were now alive with signs of renewal. Parks that had been neglected for years were bustling with families. Community centers, revitalized with city funds, offered free classes, counseling services, and job training programs. But Ava knew there was still work to be done. Resistance from some corners of the police force persisted, with a handful of officers engaging in subtle acts of sabotage. The equipment went missing, training sessions were delayed, and whispers of dissent circulated within the department. "They're testing us," Malcolm Green warned during a meeting with Ava and the Oversight Committee, "hoping we'll get tired or make a mistake." Ava's response was firm. "Then we need to show them that we're not going anywhere. This isn't a phase. It's the new standard." The Oversight Committee redoubled its efforts, increasing transparency by live streaming its hearings and publishing detailed reports on its findings. These efforts further galvanized public support, making it nearly impossible for detractors to gain traction. One of the committee's most significant victories came when it reopened a cold case involving the wrongful conviction of a young man named Devin Harris. With the committee's backing, Devin's conviction was overturned, and he was reunited with his family after nearly a decade behind bars. Devin spoke directly to Ava at a press event to celebrate the decision. "You gave me my life back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up, even when the system tried to shut you down." Ava's eyes glistened as she replied, "You're why we're here, Devin. This city owes you and so many others better, and we're going to make sure no one else goes through what you did." As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Ava's reforms became undeniable. Crime rates began to decline as trust between the community and the police slowly improved. Officers who embraced the changes found themselves building stronger relationships with the neighborhoods they patrolled, creating a ripple effect of positivity. But Ava remained cautious. She knew that change was fragile, especially when it threatened entrenched power structures. Every victory was hard-won, and every step forward risked backlash. One evening, as Ava reviewed the day's updates in her office, Malcolm arrived unannounced. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with visible unease. "What's wrong?" Ava asked, setting her papers aside. "They're coming after me," Malcolm said, his voice low. "The ones who were close to Davis and Stein, they're spreading rumors, trying to discredit me. I've even gotten a few veiled threats." Ava's jaw tightened. "You've already risked so much, Malcolm. I won't let them do this to you." Malcolm shrugged, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his decision. "I knew what I was signing up for. I just wanted you to know in case it escalates." Ava leaned forward, her gaze intense. You're not alone in this. If they come after you, they'll have to deal with all of us. We won't let them silence you. Malcolm nodded, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. Thanks, Mayor Coleman. That means a lot. The following week, the Oversight Committee announced its findings from another major investigation. Several senior officers were implicated in a coordinated effort to undermine the reforms, and disciplinary actions were swift. The arrests sent a powerful message. The old ways had no place in Ava's city. That evening, as Ava walked through the revitalized streets, she reflected on how far the city had come. Families filled the parks, neighbors greeted each other warmly, and children played without fear. The scars of the past were still visible, but they were beginning to fade. As she approached the steps of City Hall, a group of young activists waved her over. One of them, a girl no older than 16, handed Ava a handmade sign that read, "Thank you for giving us hope." Ava smiled, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "You're the reason we do this," she told them. And as the sun set over the city, Ava felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but the foundation for a brighter future had been laid. The city stood on the cusp of transformation. The resignation of Chief Davis and the subsequent arrests of corrupt officers had ignited a shift in culture. But Ava Coleman knew that lasting change required vigilance. The road ahead was as challenging as it was promising, and she was prepared to navigate every twist and turn. The Oversight Committee had become the beating heart of reform. Each week, Ava joined Mark Ellis, Rachel Wong, and Malcolm Green as they reviewed cases, planned new initiatives, and engaged with the community. Their work had already led to sweeping policy changes, but they remained focused on the long-term goal, ensuring the city's institutions served its people with fairness and integrity. At one meeting, Rachel summarized the progress they'd made. In the past 3 months, we've resolved over 40 cases of misconduct. We've helped overturn wrongful convictions and brought real accountability to the department. That's more than we could have imagined when this started. Mark nodded but raised a cautionary point. The momentum is incredible, but we can't lose sight of the bigger picture. Reform isn't just about punishing the past, it's about shaping the future. If we stop now, it could all unravel. Ava leaned forward, her tone firm. We're not stopping. This is only the beginning. The committee's work extended beyond the police department. Ava spearheaded initiatives to address the root causes of crime and inequality, redirecting funds into underserved neighborhoods. Job training programs, affordable housing projects, and youth mentorship initiatives flourished under her leadership. Justice doesn't stop at accountability, Ava said at a town hall meeting. It means investing in our communities, in our people. It means giving everyone a fair shot. The town hall was filled with families, activists, and local leaders, all eager to contribute to the city's renewal. As the session ended, a woman approached Ava, her young son in tow. "Thank you, Mayor Coleman," the woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "My son starts one of the new after-school programs next week. For the first time in years, I feel like the city cares about us." Ava knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "What's your name?" she asked, smiling. "Marcus," the boy replied shyly. "Well, Marcus," Ava said, "you've got a bright future ahead of you. Keep working hard, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As they walked away, Ava felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every policy she fought for, and every late-night strategy session was all for moments like this. Despite the progress, challenges remained. A faction of officers within the police department continued to resist the reforms, spreading misinformation and attempting to undermine the Oversight Committee. Malcolm, who had become a public advocate for change, faced relentless scrutiny. During one meeting, Layla shared her concerns. "Malcolm's been receiving more threats," she said. "He's not saying much about it, but I can tell it's weighing on him." Ava's jaw tightened. "He's one of the bravest people I know. But bravery doesn't mean we let him stand alone. Increase security for him, and make sure he knows we have his back." Even with the resistance, Ava remained steadfast. She knew that change was a marathon, not a sprint. She drew strength from the community, from the countless residents who had joined the fight for a better city. One of those residents was Elena Martinez, who had become a vocal advocate for police accountability. At a rally outside City Hall, she addressed a crowd of hundreds. "Years ago I felt invisible. Elena said, her voice steady and powerful. But today, I stand here, visible and proud. We are the reason this city is changing. Together, we're unstoppable. The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy a testament to the movement's resilience. Ava watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride. Rachel continued her work as the voice of the movement, publishing articles that celebrated progress while holding leaders accountable. One piece, titled The Road to Justice, highlighted the city's transformation and Ava's pivotal role in leading it. Ava Coleman didn't just survive an attack meant to silence her. Rachel wrote, she turned it into a rallying cry for justice. Her leadership has reshaped this city, proving that change is possible when courage and community come together. The article went viral, drawing attention not only from neighboring cities but also from national organizations eager to replicate Ava's reforms. Invitations for interviews, conferences, and partnerships flooded her office, but Ava remained focused on her city. This fight isn't about headlines, Ava told Layla after declining a high-profile interview request. It's about the people who live here. They come first. The city's transformation culminated in a celebration outside City Hall. Thousands gathered to mark the progress they had made, but Ava used the moment to remind everyone of the work still ahead. Standing at the podium, she addressed the crowd with a mixture of pride and determination. Today we celebrate how far we've come, Ava began. But let's be clear, this isn't the end. Change is a journey, not a destination. We've taken bold steps, but the road ahead is long. Together, we must remain vigilant, united, and committed to building a city that reflects our values. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the city streets. Ava looked out at the sea of diversity, determination, and hope. They were the heart of this movement, and their energy fueled her resolve. As the celebration wound down, Ava stood on the steps of City Hall, watching families and friends embrace, their laughter filling the air. Layla joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. You've done something incredible, Layla said, handing Ava a cup. We've done it together, Ava replied. And we're just getting started. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. Ava took a deep breath, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the joy of progress. The scars of her journey remained, but they no longer defined her. This city, once marred by corruption and division, was transforming into a beacon of hope. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, Ava was ready. Because the change wasn't just her duty, it was her purpose. The story of Ava Coleman is one of courage, resilience, and the transformative power of leadership rooted in justice. From the moment she stepped into office, Ava faced an unrelenting storm of resistance and hostility. The brutal attack she endured was a stark reminder of the entrenched systems of power that often seek to silence those who dare to challenge them. Yet Ava did not let fear define her. Instead, she turned her pain into purpose, rallying a community to demand accountability and systemic change. This narrative isn't just about one woman's fight. It's about the collective power of people, united by a shared vision for fairness and equality. It reminds us that while corruption and injustice may seem insurmountable, change is possible when we refuse to back down. Ava's determination led to sweeping reforms, but her story also teaches us the importance of persistence. Justice is not an endpoint, it's an ongoing process that requires vigilance and commitment. The broader lesson from Ava's journey is clear. No individual or institution is above accountability, and true leadership means putting the well-being of people above all else. It challenges each of us to ask hard questions about the systems we live under and to take an active role in shaping a better future for all. If this story resonates with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did Ava's resilience inspire you? If you found her journey impactful, share your reaction in the comments below. Was it good? Comment with a 1. Was it amazing? Comment with a 2. We'd also love to hear your own stories of resilience and justice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the meaningful stories we'll be sharing in the future. In the comments, let us know your thoughts about this journey, because together we can spark the change we wish to see.